Hello and welcome to the program. This is another episode for Beyond the Mekong as broadcast by The Diplomat. And with me today is Ian Timberlake. Ian has had an extraordinary career spanning almost 3 decades. He's spent more than a decade working in Southeast Asia, but also another 2 in Africa and the Middle East. He's worked in the United States and he's back in Bangkok after retiring from Agence France Presse. Ian Timberlake, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Luke.
You've had a long and complicated career, I guess. What have been the standouts? You were in East Timor when that went down. You covered the Iraq War from the decks of an aircraft carrier. You've had many a highlight.
And you put it very well. In fact, my chief editor at AFP, before I left, he was always telling me how I have had kind of an amazing career. I think because of the diversity of the things that I've done, the roles that I've had, which included everything from being a stringer to a bureau chief, a videographer, a fact checker, and also the diversity of the regions in which I worked, which you just outlined. But yeah, certainly Timor, that was where I became a foreign correspondent, thanks to my late friend and mentor, Kate Webb, legendary Asian correspondent with AFP, who got me in. And I got in there early, just when things were kicking off, really, in 99, a month ahead of the referendum itself. And yeah, just some of the other highlights there. And I'd like to say, AFP, they opened the door for me to the entire world. And so, I mean, Indonesia's Repomasti, Gulf Wolf, up weeks on an American aircraft carrier. I mean, I know you guys like to bug me about that and joke about it. It was an amazing experience. And I also did actually later spend some time on the ground in Iraq, because I had felt that was working at a bit of a distance. So I wanted to see things on the ground, and I did later. But other things, Aceh tsunami, I think I was there almost maybe longer than any other correspondent. I did also the diversity again, 2008 global financial crisis when I was based in Singapore, Sri Lanka. I did missions there. I think I was one of the last foreign journalists into rebel-held Kilinochchi. I went to North Korea around 2010, covered a lot of bombings in Indonesia, including the tragedy at the Aussie embassy. Saudi, covered the rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Fascinating. And Vietnam, actually, if I could keep going, I just had a reunion after many years with my former colleagues in Vietnam, and they reminded me what an interesting time I was there at, because there were a lot of protests going on against China by the church environment, and yeah, people ended up being arrested, but it was a time of tumult in the country. It was right across the region, what I'm hearing. Pretty much all the activists have either gone aboard or they are in jail.
Well, that's where I wanted to go next, actually.
One of some of the highlights. I also did 2006 Israel Hezbollah war, but by the time I got there, it was, I think, the day of the ceasefire. But I got in there right after, saw the aftermath of it. And first Trump presidency, on the fact-checking team, I fact-checked people like Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, peddling all their lies about the 2020 election. And also we did a lot on COVID.
East Timor, I guess, is probably the best success story that came out of that era. It's on the verge of joining ASEAN. It's still an impoverished country, but it's held it together. Although one has to point out that Prabowo, who was blamed for a lot of the atrocities committed when you were there, is now the Indonesian president. And given the state of the region and where the world is going now under Donald Trump too, how do you look back on the last 20, 30 years? Has it been a success? Is the world where it should be?
Oh, God. I in the global perspective. On the one hand, I feel tremendous despondency seeing what's happening in the United States. I've lived in authoritarian countries, right?
Yep.
And to see the United States, frankly, becoming an authoritarian country is tremendously disturbing. However, you still have certain it subverted the judiciary. I mean, you still have people there trying to fight, but American institutions have been strong for more than 200 years. They've got through previous crises. He's only going to be there for 4 years. I hold out hope that the institutions can outlast him, and the authoritarian damage won't be long lasting. But what I look to Europe now, frankly, Europe, Canada, Australia.
Yep.
I look to these countries. These are the ones the world can be looking to for inspiring values, democratic values. So I guess ultimately I tend to have hope. And coming back to Timor, when I first went to Timor, which was on a very brief visit actually, and I was just green at that point, right? But when I went in, I just was struck by how solid the Indonesian president felt, at least on the surface, right? And like, how can these boats ever escape from this grip? And lo and behold, like, you don't know sometimes what's going to happen. Lo and behold, President Habibie decided to give them a referendum and they became free. And in fact, they are one of the, in fact, strongest democracies in this region now. So I use that as an example to never give up hope, and it proves that things can change for the better.
Right. Your background is Canada. You're a dual citizen with Australia. You're married to Thailand, and you're back in Thailand. How are the changes in Southeast Asia, and particularly within the media game, impacted on people's lives? And when you left, Myanmar was becoming, I don't know about a beacon, but there was certainly a lot of democratic hopes. Cambodia has been on the long slide down. Vietnam has it's extraordinary what's happening in that country despite the human rights abuses. So the economy has really taken off. But the differences between now and back then are quite extraordinary.
Well, it's interesting. Again, I brought this sort of issue up with my visiting Vietnamese colleagues the other day, and they came in, and the view from Thailand here now seems to be, the economy there are a lot of concerns about the economy. And my Vietnamese colleagues reminded us that, well, Thailand has long been at a higher level of infrastructure development and so on than anybody else around this region. But I guess they just sort of held at that level, though. I mean, that's true, but it seems they sort of held at that level.
Well, there's only so many skyscrapers you can build.
Well, I don't know. I keep seeing more and more going up. But you also mentioned about the media. Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, in those 2 decades plus, we've seen continued explosion of social media, and you have some of these smaller media publications are still going, and despite tremendous challenges, you've got Rappler in the Philippines. I see Prachatai in Thailand is still going. Tempo in Indonesia, it's been going now for decades, still doing good investigative work that they do. It's great to see these sort of smaller outlets doing good journalism.
It's the big names have taken a hammering over the last 2 decades, but I've had this argument before with others that journalism and media is not going to just disappear. People being people, journalism is a natural extension. And media, given the way it is, okay, extremely difficult times in terms of the mainstream and how we were used to doing things as opposed to now. But these smaller publications, I think, offer a lot of hope. I think you're quite right.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, Luke. And it's very interesting in Thailand too. I mean, that there are a lot of initiatives for transparency, open data. The information is in fact out there. It's just that a lot of the journalists need more training. I think I went to a seminar on this a while back, and that's what they were saying, that the journalists need more training in how to get the data. Like, it's there.
Yeah, data journalism is becoming a big thing.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's all about transparency and the public accountability.
Oh, you were on the fact-checking desks, as an outsider to that aspect of journalism, how did you find that? It doesn't exactly conjure up images of as you were on the decks of an aircraft carrier or, in the throes of what was happening in East Timor, but the fact-checking desks have emerged as a very important part of journalism.
Well, I loved it. I loved it. The role I was in was I was part editor, part investigator, so I did my own work.
Right.
As I said earlier, part of it on a range of subjects. Some of it was on the U.S. economy, some of it on lies about the election, and various COVID a lot, and conspiracy theories, and it was funded under a contract with Facebook,
Right.
which became Meta, and is now pulling the money out of this. But anyway, at that time, it allowed us to do this, and I loved it because to me it was, in fact, getting to the heart of what a journalist is supposed to do: fight for the truth, hold the powerful to account, and act in the democratic interest. If there was a post on social media that getting a lot of a distribution, posing a danger, a social danger, either to the democracy or to people's health, then we acted on it. We fact checked it, and you put that fact check, it becomes like a screen on the actual Facebook post that people will see.
Right.
And it essentially forces them to read the fact check. So I found this tremendously satisfied. And more than that, the editor that I had at the time, Arthur McMillan, gave me a rare opportunity, which is a dream. I mean, to spend months looking into something. So I investigated somebody named Sherry Tenpenny, who is an American osteopath and was at the time one of the biggest global spreaders of vaccine misinformation. And she had an extensive business network, and she was serially indebted to the US IRS, which I uncovered. And so I just loved it. It's like, it's a dream just to be able to dig like that. And she was already under scrutiny, so I don't take credit for this, but it was satisfying to see that the Ohio State Medical Court later suspended her. Now, unfortunately, she got the license back, but nonetheless, that was something I very much enjoyed, and it's just tragic to see that the hypocritical turn now by Facebook that they're not supporting this kind of project
Right.
as they were.
Were you surprised or disappointed by the amount of lies people tell? Not just politicians, I guess, but I mean, if you were asked to check 10 stories, for instance, how many of them came up as lies?
Well, specifically in terms of the fact checking project, yeah. I don't think we was surprised because it was it was so rampant, and you had the president himself as liar in chief. So
Yeah.
and from there it spread outwards, and it's basically all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in fairness, you did get some people that spread misinformation and didn't mean to, but yeah, and occasionally they sent a note saying they were really sorry, but that was the rarity.
That's interesting. The unintentional.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, say, if I was interviewing a prime minister or a president particularly, and you were being told lies, fibs, and people would say, "Why didn't you question him on that? Or why didn't you argue that point? Or why did you run that story? And it's like, well, you're not always in a position to ask the question back, and you're not always in a position to question what they've said. And more importantly, the Prime Minister and the President, you have to report what they say, even if it is lies. And I think with the fact-checking
Well-
desks, a situation has been created where you can say, boom, look, this is the fact versus what they're actually saying.
I know what you mean, Luke, and certainly at times, yeah, if you're interviewing a prime minister or something, but maybe you may not be in a position to counter them. But I would actually suggest that it is one's duty to you should be prepared and able to counter them.
I agree. And that's what fact
And if
checking
you
does.
can't counter them during the interview, the story itself should provide the context. That
I agree with that.
those untruths should not be allowed to be spread. Otherwise, I don't think we've done our duty.
Oh, I agree with that, but I'm also talking about you've got a press conference and there's 50 journalists in there, and Reuters, AFP, AP, The Wires are just bang sending off urgent after urgent what they say, and there's rarely is there the time and scope to be able to say, oh, hang on a second, that's not right. But with a fact-checking desk, that puts you in a position where you can do that.
True, but people have also argued that there is a thing called the truth sandwich, and even if you're sending out an alert, to me, I think that if you're sending out an alert, you still need to put it in context. And there is a thing called a truth sandwich, and if there is some doubt about what they're saying, you find a way to sandwich it around it.
No, I agree with that totally, especially if you're pulling together a 500-word story at the end of the day. But the realities on the ground are often, it's not always conducive to doing it the way it should be. But so it goes. And I have to ask you, your favorite crime stories. You've always been a fan of big crime stories.
Yeah, well, in fact, before I joined AFP, I mean, another sort of career in Canada as mostly a crime reporter, and I did that for about 12 years. So, and I've always been fascinated by police work and stuff like that. I covered the 50th anniversary of the Hells Angels in California. It's one of the things I did. I investigated police wrongdoing, and it was really enjoyed it, and it continued to be something I'm interested in
What was the standout crime?
today. Though now I'm more interested in white collar crime.
I know that. We'll get to that in a minute, actually. What was your standout crime? I remember the Hello Kitty murders in Hong Kong. That was a cracker.
Oh, look, I mean, as I said, one of them was one of the standouts was when I was able to expose police wrongdoing in Windsor, Ontario, when we found out that the SWAT team was drinking in public behind the headquarters, and then one of them went off and fired off a round on his way home, happened to go into the window of the mayor's house. But no, sure. Other than that, in Toronto, I did a lot. At that time, actually, connection back to Asia, Sri Lankan gangs were very, very strong in Toronto. They would go around with AK-47 shooting up donut shops. And that was all tied back to the Tamil Tigers as well. It was all tied together. So, and it's fascinating covering that, dealing with the detectives working on that. Motorcycle gangs, I worked on that fair bit. So no specific case, just the general categories that I enjoyed.
And in terms of white collar crime, you're now focusing on money laundering out of Bangkok. And that's becoming a huge issue in Southeast Asia, particularly with the Chinese criminal syndicates operating out of Cambodia, the human trafficking and scam compounds. It's finally, perhaps, governments are starting to take notice, and I mean governments outside of Cambodia. The Chinese are dreadfully upset about what's happened. The Thai Prime Minister has been forced to stand aside, and it looks like it's culminating, if that makes any sense.
Well, it does indeed. In addition to what you said, U.S. Treasury issued a notice of proposed rulemaking that would identify Huiwan Group as the financial institution of primary money laundering concern. And folks in the AML space are really looking at this as quite a significant development, from what I'm picking up from
Mm.
the seminars that I've been attending with them.
Right. And is it possible to get a handle on this? I mean, money laundering has always been an issue, but it's kind of moved out of a shop front where the till can be topped up with a few extra dollars at the end of the day, and then it's run through the books and comes out clean, or gambling, horse races, casinos, the like. But it's moved obviously well into the digital sphere, and it was totally revolutionized or industrialized, digitalized with the COVID pandemic out of Sihanoukville. And it's like, obviously the authorities haven't done enough, but can they do enough to climb on top of it?
Well, that that's always the battle, isn't it? I mean, because these transnational criminal organizations are operating like transnational corporations, right? And they're always trying to be one step ahead of law enforcement. But they're using AI. The criminals are using AI, right? And AI is increasingly being turned to in the AML and anti-financial crime fight. So they're well aware of the urgency of it, and the tools are very impressive. I mean, able to bring in multiple variables, jurisdictions, counterparties, and so on, try to tie everything together and flag broader connections than just one single transaction, say. So there are a lot of advances going on, but yeah, it's always tough to match wits with these criminals.
And then you've got the traditional relationships between countries. I mean, it requires the Chinese and the Americans to talk with each other. Cambodia is basically a client state of China, but it's not listening to what Beijing has to say about these criminal elements. And then you have Thailand, which is somewhere in between China and the Americans, and they are trying to act, but in terms of the meat and the sandwich, I'm stealing a line from what you said before, but it's a complicated dog's breakfast.
Yeah, and now also with you yeah, and perhaps not helped by Trump's treatment of Southeast Asia, perhaps accentuating ultimately the political differences within the region.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I mentioned this in a podcast the other day that Donald Trump had imposed 46% tariffs on Myanmar, which is the highest in the region, and where everybody else was complaining, on Ming Lang, who's the head of the junta there, he thanked Donald Trump, saying that his letter notifying his junta of the tariff increase or the imposition of tariffs was a letter of recognition for his government. You know, which, uh, given that he is responsible, the presence of these Chinese criminal syndicates, and as from along that border area in Shui Koko, not far from where you are in Thailand, it just kind of it leaves me dumbfounded about where are they going to go next in terms of trying to crack down on this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And when you do look back, what's been the hardest part of the job or the hardest part of your life, I guess?
Uh, it's actually a difficult thing to answer because the hardest part is losing friends or colleagues, seeing a lot of injustice, and trying to find a way to deal with that. um, and which I think only recently I did find a way to deal with. Um, so,
Have you had to struggle with PTSD?
well, the person that I credit helping me with that was a psychologist in Cyprus, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, she said there may have been some of that, yeah. But ultimately, it's not really about the label you put on it. But the main thing is that in my case, yeah, I reckon I was finally able to, process all that, shall we say. But it's, a difficult thing when you look around and see there's no justice for example, my neighbor in the Makoto Hotel in Dili, Agus Mulyo one,
Mm-hmm.
Indonesian journalist, killed by Johnny Marquez, a member of Indonesia's Kapassus, who was also a militia team leader. Marcos also killed a bunch of Catholic clergy, and he was pardoned by, he was convicted, sentenced to 33 years in East Timor, but Horta later pardoned him. But yeah, I realized there are political realities always evolved, of course, but that doesn't take away the difficulty of seeing this kind of thing. And what about for the Timorese? What about for the Sudanese, for that matter? Also, you look around, there's not a whole lot of justice going on. I think.
What mattered most in journalism?
Good question, Luke. For me, it's not really been about the big story. It's what's always stayed with me and been most meaningful is the people I've met, hearing, I just love talking to people, right? Hearing about their lives, their struggles, learning about what they do. And I love also building contacts, often with people who, maybe are reluctant to talk to journalists, but that's part of the challenge if you can break through that. And I also like telling stories about disappearing traditions too. For example, in Sudan, which we haven't talked about Sudan yet, I did a story on there was this old bookshop there, and you had all this stuff in there, basically decades covered in dust and stuff, and English language books. And I wrote about this bookshop, and I just enjoy chronicling things like that. Or similarly, in Riyadh, there was an encyclopedia salesman, and by this time, this was about 2016, so internet and whatnot had already taken off, social media. But this bloke was wandering the streets, the boiling hot streets of Riyadh, peddling encyclopedias. So I wrote about that too. Because I find it interesting when people are carrying on these kind of traditions, traditions that are disappearing. It's a way of helping to preserve them, I guess, by writing about them.
Right. And apart from white collar crime, what else would you write about? Is there a book in you?
Oh, well, in fact, right now, I am doing a small book, so I'm pretty busy already. I mean, I'm trying to improve my Thai language skills, but so I am writing a small book about my father who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company at trading posts in the Canadian Arctic. Right. And Hudson's Bay Company just went out of business this year. So it's, again, it's another way to recognize things that are disappearing. I mean, my father knows how to make an igloo.
He didn't pass that on to his son.
I've never, I've never tried. No, I never had the chance to try.
You're fast becoming an Australian then.
Well, that's all right too. In recent years, I've spent an increasing amount of time in Australia because my parents were spending more time there themselves, and most of my friends are Australian, like yourself. So I really like the country, and so that's all good with me. I like cricket too and rugby.
All right. On that note, Aussie Ian Timberlake, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.